A warm welcome to you all, Jake Crulee podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into another transmission. And just before we start, Terry, I want to just thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. What I love about your work, and obviously you have a big message to share, but I love your energy. I love your positivity. I love how you you can approach a certain situation and frame it in a more constructive, with a more constructive attitude. And I feel like we need more people in the world like that. You know, we often experience hard times and challenges, and I think it's really the way that we respond to it and approach it from when the challenge begins that really matters. So having people like you in the world and actually being able to have you as a guest and speak with you and put your message out there, that is something that I am passionate about, and I'm so thankful that you've been able to come on the show. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jake. I think this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. And can you please introduce yourself for those who are listening to or watching this podcast, please?
Sure. My name is Terry Tucker. I am from the United States. I grew up in Chicago, one of the larger cities in the U.S. You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball here in the U.S. When I graduated from college, I was actually the first person in my family to graduate from college.
Wow.
I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now. I'm much older than you are, but this was
Yeah.
before the internet was available to help people find employment. I did find my first job out of college in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. I don't know if you have those in New Zealand.
Yeah, we do.
Um,
Yep.
okay, so that was my first job out of college. The downside of that was that I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer at the same time. As I said, professionally started out at Wendy's, then became a hospital administrator. And then I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did there was I was an undercover narcotics investigator. I was also a SWAT team hostage negotiator. Then I started my own security consulting business. I coached girls' high school basketball, became an author in 2020, but for the last 10 years have been dealing with this rare form of cancer, rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the military here in the U.S.
Wow. Just a plethora and like a buffet of professional experience for you. And I think just congratulations to you for having a marriage, having children, having a what seems to me like a successful life. And we will touch on those topics that you've just spoken about. But I'm always interested to hear about people's childhood and growing up from childhood to their adolescence. So, how would you describe your life growing up as a child and into your adolescent years?
Yeah, I am the oldest of three boys. As I said, I'm 6'8" and I played basketball in college. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher at the University of Notre Dame here in the US, and then another brother who's 6'6", who played professional basketball here in the United States. And then my dad was 6'5". So I sort of joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, in front. But our 5'8" mother was the boss, and I am very fortunate. My story is not one where, my dad was an alcoholic and he beat my mom and all that stuff. That wasn't
Yeah,
our family. My
yeah.
my parents showed us the importance of family, of caring for each other, of supporting each other, of loving each other. And my parents practiced what I call divide and conquer parenting, where, I would have a basketball game at this location and my dad would go to that. And I'd have a brother who had a practice at another location and my mother would go to that. And my mom would stay up late at night, washing our uniforms and making sure we had everything that was necessary. And I swear my mom was at the store every day, buying milk and meat and all that kind of stuff. Because I mean, when you have four large men in the house, we needed a lot of fuel to keep us going. So my childhood was pretty amazing. And my dad has been dead for almost 40 years. My mom is still alive, and I'm still very close with my brothers. As a matter of fact, they were visiting me a couple weeks ago, and they were here for 4 days. We did not turn on the television, and we did not leave the house. All we did was talk and have a good time and laugh about certain things that we remember growing up.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful story. And even how you spoke about having the television off, I think the way that we are actually connecting with each other, and especially those like our loved ones, what it means to actually connect. We see people now, maybe they're having dinner out, but they're both on their cell phones. People aren't exactly, let's say, like truly connecting. And I could just imagine the long receipt list, like supermarket receipt list of all the grocery items that she would have bought. And you did speak about playing basketball. Where did you play exactly?
So I played at a military college in South Carolina called the Citadel, and my big claim to fame, if you want to call it professional or in college, was
Yeah.
that I played against Michael Jordan
Wow.
when I was in college. And kind of a funny story. Fast forward about 18, 20 years, my youngest brother was a basketball coach in Chicago, and he coached Michael Jordan's two sons when they were in high school. So he sort of tells a funny story. He said one night, it's toward the end of practice, and he said, I'm teaching the players a new drill. And I look up and I realize nobody's paying attention to me at all. So I looked where they were looking, and Jordan had come into the gym as a dad. He was there to pick up his kids after practice, not, for any kind of basketball related activity. And my brother looked at him and he said, hey, Michael, you're kind of a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind stepping out in the hall until practice is over? And Jordan and his wife were incredible people. They didn't try to coach the team. They let my brother do his thing. And Jordan said, sure, I'll step out. I'll wait out in the hall till practice is over. And my brother thought later, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice. So
It's pretty cool to hear that he's humble enough to recognize and have that situational awareness, and to be so gracious and doing that, not being let's say not narcissistic per se, but there would be an element of that had he said no. When like people like Michael Jordan, right? Like these people are a needle in a haystack, especially someone like Jordan. Did you notice, like, did he stand out during your time playing basketball? Because when I'm around certain individuals, not to say that I know them personally, but you can either see them and their skill, or you can just feel an aura, like a greatness about them. Did you feel that or see that?
I didn't, but you've got to understand, when I played against him, it was his freshman year, his first year in college. He was just kind of getting his legs underneath him, so to speak. His team would go on that year to win the national championship. They would be the best team in college basketball here in the United States. And he would make a shot at the end of the game that would allow North Carolina, his team, to win the championship. So when I played against him, he was still not the Michael Jordan that you and I both know. There was another player by the name of James Worthy who went on to play in the NBA and who is in the Hall of Fame in that he was kind of their big gun. He was the guy that they looked to. And then as the season progressed, he and Jordan kind of teamed up, and between the two of them, they just ran through the NCAA tournament and won the national championship.
From your life experience, and you're a coach, and we will touch on that. I'm curious to know, what do you think sets the 1% of the 1% apart from everyone else. Like let's say Michael Jordan or like Mike Tyson or like Evander Holyfield or any other great sportsman. What do you think separates them, like Tiger Woods? What separates them from, the 10th best player?
I think a couple things. Number one, mindset. There's back in 1976, long before you were born, but I was 16 years old, and there was a U.S. gold medal winning Olympic swimmer by the name of Shirley Babashaw. And she had a great quote, and her quote was this: winners think about what they want to happen, losers think about what they don't want to happen. So that's the difference between a winner and a loser. A winner's like, I can override my negative brain, my negative mindset, and focus on the things that I want to occur. Whereas losers, they can't focus on anything other than the negative aspects of pursuing a goal or a dream. So I would say number one is their mindset. They have a tremendous mindset, a tremendous focus, a tremendous determination, to get the job done. Secondly, I think they have good habits. Motivation is one thing, but if you don't have good habits and the discipline to implement those habits, then you're never going to be any good at anything you do. You have to, motivation is sort of I describe it as sort of, I guess, lighting the fuse, so to speak. So you have to have that internal, I want to get this done or I want to do this, but then you have to have the good habits and the discipline necessary to implement those habits. If you don't do that, if you have bad habits or not enough discipline, it doesn't matter how much motivation you have, you're still not going to accomplish what you want. And then number three, I think they just have a relentless drive to be the best, to be successful. And a lot of people say, oh, I want to be good. Very few people, are willing to go into the gym and, put up thousands and thousands and thousands of shots every single day to get better at it. We always used to say in basketball that good players were made in the off season, good teams were made during the season.
Absolutely. And I do think about like the amount of sacrifice it really took or really takes to actually become the 1% of the 1%. Like you think about all the things like we're doing in our lives that we wouldn't be doing if we wanted to be the 1%, right? And it's almost like on the outside, it seems so great and grand, and I'm sure it is, but to actually be in their experience and to see like the amount of training and time and recovery and just it just seems like their whole life and life's purpose and everything they do in their day to day is completely aligned and tunnel visioned with their goals. And when you were playing basketball, did you have NBA aspirations? Like, why were you playing basketball?
I did at one point in time. My problem was I had 3 knee surgeries when I was in high school. So wow. I was just lucky to be able to play at the highest level here in the United States, having had those knee surgeries. And so professional basketball, anything beyond college for me just wasn't in the cards because physically I had a bad knee. And so, it's like, okay, that's fine. I got what I wanted out of it. I had a blast. I played against great players and I received a free college. Well, it's not really free. I mean, I'm certainly giving of my time and talent to play, and they're giving me an education. So I was able to get an education out of that. My other brother was able to get a free college education. So it was only one brother, the pitcher at Notre Dame, who actually had to pay for college. So if you think about it, 2 out of your 3 kids got to go to college for free.
Yeah. And I mean, college in America seems to be fairly expensive. So I think that's a great deal. And before we started this podcast, you were speaking about are you currently in a wheelchair?
I am.
Was that due to the knee injuries, or how did that come about?
So that came about because of my battle with cancer that started back in 2012. I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my 3rd toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because at the time I was a high school basketball coach. And as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after it didn't heal for a couple weeks, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine, and he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave, excuse me, either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have a rare form of melanoma, which most people think of as a sun disease, too much exposure to the sun, which affects the melanin or the pigment in our skin. And this form of melanoma appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And so I had a whole lot of treatment. I was on a drug treatment for 5 years that didn't work. In 2018, I had my left foot amputated. That was the first amputation. Wow. And then in 2020, right during the middle of the COVID pandemic here in the US, I had my left leg amputated. And so I've been in a wheelchair. I do have a prosthetic leg, but it's taken a long time for me to be comfortable on that, because as you can imagine, when you're 6'8", falling is not an option.
Yeah, absolutely. And my condolences to you. And obviously, I'm sure you've worked through it and accepted it. But yeah, I mean, it's cancer is something that none of us want. My grandmother actually passed away from pancreatic cancer, and I was just seeing her, change color. Her energy levels dropped, and she lost a lot of weight. And obviously, she didn't make it. But I'm really interested to hear about how you dealt with having your leg amputated, having your foot amputated, and living in a wheelchair. Like, have you had to work through things mentally or emotionally, spiritually?
Yeah, I think all of the above. That's an interesting question, because I recently had a nurse ask me, what was it like to have your foot amputated? What was it like to have your leg amputated? And what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Jake. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. We get all excited about our body. We want to be physically fit, and we want to do all this kind of stuff. But, you end up like me. You lose your foot, and then you lose your leg. I have tumors in my lungs now, which I'm currently being treated for. And that, so, the physical part is hard. You get chemotherapy. You talked about was it your aunt or your grandmother who had pancreatic cancer?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. So, you saw her physical, presence diminish. She lost weight, she changed color and all that kind of stuff. But that's not really who your grandmother was. Your grandmother was her heart, her mind, and her soul. And so I think we spend a lot of time working on our bodies. We don't spend nearly as much time working on our heart, our mind, and our souls. And that's really who we are. So I would suggest, I'm not telling you to not eat right. I'm not telling you to not exercise. I did all those things.
Yes.
I still eat right. I still try to do all those things. But it's really your heart, your mind, and your soul that is really who you are.
Absolutely. And I was actually having a discussion this morning with my better half. And I was just speaking about how, like, life itself is like just pertain to the body. We feed the body, we clean the body, we put makeup on the body, and really the body itself is obviously it's a great this great thing, right? We can explore, we can learn, we can interact. But in its essence, like it smells, we've got earwax and mucus. We need to take 1s and 2s, BO. I mean, all of these things that society, we mask that, and we beautify the body, and actually we don't actually take care of the owner of the body. So I love that specific message that you just put out, and I'm actually an advocate for it. Obviously, I don't try and preach it too much, because most people don't want to hear that. right? Like they want to stay in that societal mindset. But I want to touch on your different professional roles, like during your life. So, can you share? Well, you've shared some, but what have been, or maybe you could share more if there are more. And I'm just interested to hear about what your biggest takeaways were from those specific roles.
So let me kind of give you the backstory. So if you look at my resume, my first two jobs were in business. I was in the marketing department at Wendy's, and then I was a hospital administrator. And then I talked about making that big pivot in my life to being in law enforcement. And let me tell you the backstory, because it'll make more sense from that. So my grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun, taking a homicide, a murder suspect, back to the lockup. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories. And my father was an infant at the time. He remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. And let's face it, trauma medicine in I think this was 1933, was a whole lot different than trauma medicine is today. In other words, there was no trauma medicine back then. And so when I expressed an interest in going into law enforcement, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to go to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's what my dad wanted me to do. That wasn't what I felt my purpose or my passion or my why, whatever you want to call it, was. So I had a big decision to make when I graduated from college. I could say, Dad, I know you're sick and you're dying, but sorry, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and go into law enforcement. Or out of respect and love for you, I will do what you want me to do. And so that's what I did. I went into business. My first two jobs were in business. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. So that's kind of, if you look at my resume probably makes a little more sense once you understand sort of the backstory.
So, like, having gone through different professional roles, were you able to adapt like on the fly, or did you experience challenges going from this professional role into like a different professional area?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there's always a learning curve whenever you take on, I think, any kind of a new role. So, I mean, my first job out of college, I was so green and wet behind the ears. I mean, I didn't, I remember my first 3 or 4 months working for Wendy's. I think my most significant business contribution or business accomplishment was either making copies, ordering and picking up lunch for certain meetings, and gassing up the company cars of the managers that I worked with. I mean, I'm thinking, I got a degree here. When am I going to do business stuff? I mean, I'm doing kind of administrative stuff. Not that it needed to be done. And, I needed to pay my dues, and I get that. But it was, there was always this thing in my heart. And I always, when I talk to young people especially, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be the things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them. So yeah, I had a significant learning curve in all my different jobs. And I think it was good to have those two jobs in business, because it gave me some life experience that I was able to take into law enforcement. And, people always ask me today, if I want to be a policeman, what do you suggest? And it's kind of like what we were talking about before we jumped on, started recording. I always tell them, put down your devices and go out on the street and talk to the homeless guy, and go up to the penthouse and talk to that guy. Because if you can talk to people, you can be successful in law enforcement. If you're not able to talk to people, you're just going to be frustrated along the way.
Yeah, I think we've lost, like as a whole, like generally, I feel like we've lost that ability to interact, especially the younger ones like myself and younger. We're obviously conversating more over Facebook Messenger or video call, and I almost feel like here in New Zealand and potentially in the USA as well, it's quite polarized. I feel like the relationship between generally between police officers and like your general population now has changed. So back, I'd say maybe 15 years ago when I was younger in primary school, I remember having conversations with police officers. You know, I remember they'd stop and say, "Hey, how's your day going?" And all of this stuff. It was quite a friendly type of interaction. Not to say that that doesn't happen now, but I don't experience that anymore. It's either we are here to do work or we are leaving. What are your thoughts on like that switch or that interaction and connection between police officers and like the general population now versus let's say 50 years ago?
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, especially, I think COVID, allowed everybody to hide behind their devices, their
Yeah,
computers and stuff. I really do.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and to say things, and we've gotten this whole woke society where, you can call yourself anything you want. And I get it,
Yeah, yeah.
and like I've always said this, I will defend your right to call you whatever you want to be called. But if you're a man and you're calling yourself a woman, it's not my problem when I don't call you a woman. You're a man. I'm sorry. You're a man. It's not my issue. It's not my problem. It's kind of like saying, well, okay, then you need to call me a toaster and a wash machine, because that's how I identify. And
Right,
how dare you not do that? So I
right.
think we sort of gotten, we got brave hiding behind our devices, and now that COVID is gone, now we're getting back face to face with people. Now you'll tell me something or you'll say something derogatory to me over the computer or online that you would never say to me to my face if I was a police officer. Now, that being said, I think the police are sort of the natural extension of government, and they're the most visible. They're out there all the time. And so people see them, and if they don't like something that's going on, we always are the brunt, and I mean, you have to have a thick skin to do that job. You have to want to do it, because I always tell people, think about this. If this was your job, number one, you made less money than a plumber. Number two, nobody wanted you around. And number three, everybody you contacted lied to you. Now, if that was your job every day, if you went into work every day and experienced those three things, how long would you do that job? I mean, think about it. And so, you have to have a desire to serve. You have to have a desire to serve your community. And I think that's what most good police officers do. I mean, everybody thinks we want to kick butt and take names and arrest people. We really don't. We really
Right.
don't want to fight you. We really don't want to have to shoot you. We really even don't want to take you to jail. We want to find a solution that solves the problem, what we used to call voluntary compliance. That's all we want you to do. Just do what we ask you to do. If we're wrong, we'll apologize. If we're right, then we'll solve the problem. But you fighting us or you calling us names, I mean, you talked about kids. I can't tell you how many traffic stops I did on somebody where their kids were in the back and they're like, see that? That's a policeman. He's a bad man. And I'm like, I used to say to the parent, why are you telling your kid that? What if your kid needs help? You're basically telling them, this cop's a bad guy. You don't know me. You don't know if I'm a bad guy or not. Why would you say that to your kids when maybe your kid is going to need to come to me for help someday?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you spoke about how, this gender identification and how you will respect other individuals' rights to identify as who they want to identify. But I often like contemplate at the base level of it how So from my perspective, I sort of take your perspective on that as how we can respect each other enough to know that, you can be who you are, but I should not change my world perception because you want me to. It's almost quite narcissistic, like self-loathing or self-loving, and it just doesn't. It makes absolutely like no sense. And being a police officer, and not knowing if honestly not knowing if you're going to come home that night. How did you deal with that?
With which part about not coming home and that, or
Like
just the
just the
perception of the public?
the anxiety, the fear. Maybe there was fear and anxiety. People were lying to you. Just being in a state of just turbulence all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you realize, I mean, your life is, when you're on the job, it's, way high, and then it's like, okay, nothing's going on. You're just driving around, and
Right.
it's real boring. And that's just physically not good for you. It produces enzymes and chemicals in your body that high and low, that constantly up and down and things like that. What was I afraid? Yes, absolutely. And any police officer that tells you they're never afraid is either stupid or they're lying to you, because fear is something that it's built into us for a reason. There's a great book written by a guy here at Stanford University in the United States by the name of Gavin DeBecker. It's called The Gift of Fear. And I worked with a partner. Where I worked, it was mostly single person cars, but I worked with a partner because we got all the gun runs, the drug runs, the shootings, and all that kind of stuff. So we were together, and we had a pact very early on that even if we were going to a noise run, some neighbors complaining, that the next apartment, their TV's too loud. If the back of our, the hair on the back of our neck went up, if one of us said, I got a bad feeling about this run, we would not be like, oh, it's only a noise run, and dismiss it. If one of us had that feeling, we would be like, okay, we're going to be extra safe. We're going to be extra cautious, because even if it's a simple run, it could still turn into something incredibly dangerous. So we were always cognizant of that. And so we used fear not as, I'm paralyzed and I can't function, but more as, we need to be more cautious. We need to take our time. There's no rush, and make sure that we come home safe, because there are plenty of people that I've been to their funerals, policemen that died in the line of duty, people that I was in the car with, and stuff like that. So it's a scary thing, but you can't let it paralyze you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I couldn't even imagine just that feeling of just being in that kind of turbulence and having this perception, and people just constantly watching your every move. I was hoping you could share a story or experience that like stands out to you, either while being in the police or SWAT. Did you ever bring a drug ring down? Did you ever have to pull a gun out on a suspect? Were you ever in a wild chase?
Yes, to almost all of those. Have been shot at a couple times when I was
Wow.
in the drug unit. We were buying dope from this guy. The guy took off on us. We took off after him. He had some colleagues, and they shot at us. And
Wow.
honestly, I don't know how the guy missed me. I mean, he shot at me from just on the other side of the street, and it was a residential street. I mean, he missed, thank God. So yes, I've been shot at. Unfortunately, I was not able to return fire on him because there were people behind him, people around him. Drug dealers don't care where the bullets go. Cops have to care where the bullets go. And sometimes you just can't fire back. You just need to get down behind cover and hope you don't get shot. So that happened. I remember one night my partner and I were in a vehicle pursuit with a felony suspect. It was nighttime, it was raining, and we were driving 130 miles an hour. And I remember we both looked at each other like, and we stopped it. We're like, no, it's not worth our lives or that person's life. We'll get them another day. And so we shut the pursuit down. Kind of the funny part of that story was he got off at the next exit on the freeway and ended up going down a hill and around a curve that he didn't realize was there. And he literally wrapped his car around a telephone pole. He lost control, and that telephone pole hit his car right in the middle, and it turned it into like the letter U.
Wow.
And so he ended up being caught because he wrecked. We never really took down a drug cartel. We did work with the federal part of the Drug Enforcement Administration, where they were up on wiretaps on certain people and things like that. I'll give you an interesting story there. So for me to charge, if I arrested you, if I wanted to charge you with a gun charge, a state gun charge, number one, I had to have the gun. The gun had to be in my possession. And number two, the gun had to work. So I had to test fire the gun to make sure it worked. So if the gun didn't work, I couldn't charge you with it. Or if I didn't have the gun, I couldn't charge you with it. On the federal level here, if they're up on a wiretap on you, if they're listening on your phone and you say the word gun, that's a federal gun charge. They never have to have the gun. They never have to, see if the gun works. Every time you say gun, they can charge you federally with a federal gun charge. That's why you hear in the United States, guys got a 50 count indictment. Yeah, he was up on a wiretap. The guy said gun 25 times. So half of those are, because he said,
Yeah.
he said gun. So those were kind of those, in terms of SWAT. I'll give you two quick stories. One was I was working this particular night. A call came out of a barricaded subject. So I got to the scene pretty quickly because I was in uniform in a marked car. And I was talking to the officers on scene. I'm like, what's the deal? He's drunk. He's barricaded himself in his house with a gun and his wife. I said, do you have him on the phone? He's like, yeah, we're talking to him. I said, well, let me talk to him. So we talked for about 10 minutes. You usually didn't ask somebody to come out that quickly. It was usually a much longer period of time, but I just kind of had a gut feeling. So I said to him, I said, what would it take for you to come out right now? There was a big pause, and he said, give me a beer. I said, if I gave you a beer, do I have your word that you would let your wife go, that you would put the gun down and you would come out? He said, yes. Do I have your word I could drink it? I said, yes, you have my word. So I gave one of the officers $5. I said, go down to the store, buy a beer. The tactical team put it on the front porch. I called them back. I said, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it unless you let your wife go and you put the gun down. All of a sudden, the front door flies open. Here comes his wife. Here he comes with his hands up. We handcuffed him, let him drink his beer, and off to jail he went. So that's not typical. That's kind of more of a funny story. This last one I'll tell you is kind of interesting. This started probably about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And this person decided they wanted to commit suicide. They wanted to kill themselves. So they slit their wrist, and that didn't work. And for some reason, they thought it would be a good idea to turn the gas on in their oven and stick their head in the oven.
Right.
Well, that didn't work either. And so then the person called a relative and said, I want to kill myself. I've got a gun now. And so the relative called the police. And so we were there, and I was talking to him. And now it's probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I think I just warmed down. And I said to him, look, what do you think about coming out? He's like, yeah, I want to come out. He said, I'm really tired. I just want to come out. I said, great. Put the gun down. Take the phone with you. When you get outside, do what the officers tell you. And then I will come to the scene and we'll talk face to face. He said, I'd really like that. Well, he hangs up the phone, which is not uncommon because we're conditioned to do that when a call is over, to hang up the phone. About 30 seconds later, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and says, we heard a gunshot. I thought, oh my God, you didn't. He did. Shot himself in the head. Shot himself in such an angle that the bullet went in under his temple, under the skin by his temple, went around his skull and came out the other side. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. So 3 times this guy tried to kill himself in one night. That said to me that, hey, God doesn't want you upstairs just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would actually be interesting to just hear from that individual and see how they are now, if they've had a change in perspective in their life as well. And I really appreciate you sharing those stories with me. I've always wanted to talk with a police officer and for them to be, I think, just quite open about some of the experiences they have, because I've noticed like I've only come across a couple of police officers, but I've just been in conversation with them, and they're not really willing to open to me, and that's fair enough. I don't have any expectations from them. You talk a lot about leadership, and I'm interested to know, like, how would you define leadership?
That's a great question. I'm sure it's been defined, a million different ways because there's probably been a
Yeah.
million different books written about it. Um, I guess I would define leadership as service. That I need to tell my people what needs to be done, give them the resources and the time necessary to do it, and then to support them in any way that I can. A lot of people talk about leading from the front, follow me kind of thing. I think that's important, but I also think it's equally important to lead from behind. In other words, you're out there doing it. What do you need? What resources do you need? How can I help you? Well, I need these resources. Okay, I'm back here. I'm getting those resources to help you. So I think it's as equally important to lead from the front as it is to lead from behind. And it's just giving the people the things they need to be successful in life. I think a leader's job is to develop more leaders. It's not to put your thumb on people and tell them, do it this way and stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's to give them the resources. It's kind of like, why do you hire somebody? You hire somebody because they have certain skills, more than likely skills that you don't have. So if that's the case, why would I get in there and try to tell you how to do what I don't know how to do? And I think a lot of leaders try to do that. It's like, well, I'm the boss, so I got to tell you how to do it. Why wouldn't you just sort of step back? I hired you to do this job, now go do it. If whatever you need, come to me and I'll try to get it for you so that you can be successful. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question about what I think about leadership.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully articulated, and I love how you did touch on, pressing the thumb on employees or just some people in general. From my experience in the workforce and like friends and family, I've come across a lot of micromanagers. Leaders who are so micromanagey that you actually don't feel like you're doing anything, and I almost feel like I was like put in a box and I couldn't spread my wings and be creative and navigate my way through this challenge how I would like to do it. How do you think we should go about um, like interacting with or just speaking to the leader about potential micromanaging?
I think that comes from two reasons. I think if you instead of saying, oh, my boss is a jerk, I think you need to try to step back. I mean, let's face it, it's true. My boss treats me, like I'm in
Yeah.
a box. I can't do anything without, I can't go to the bathroom without letting him know or her know and stuff like that. And I think you kind of sort of have to step back and ask the question, why? Why are they like that? And I think that comes from two reasons. Either one, they're incredibly insecure. They don't feel that they have the tools or the ability necessary to be successful, or two, they've been burned before, where they gave somebody enough rope and somebody, hung them out to dry. So they're like, absolutely not. I'm going to keep things real close to the vest. I'm not going to give you that leeway where you can burn me again. Those would be my guesses. Every situation, every person is different. But I would say that one, either you don't feel you have the resources or the knowledge or whatever to be successful, or two, you've been burned. So if that's the case, I would step back. And this is a couple of things we learned when I was in SWAT negotiation, that you would ask questions to try to get the bad guy or the guy that was barricaded or whatever to help solve the problem. You're thinking, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to solve the problem. Yeah, I am supposed to solve the problem. But think how much better it is if I can get the bad guy, unbeknownst to him, to help me solve the problem. And you do that by asking what and how questions. So maybe going to in your example, maybe going to your boss and saying, hey, look, I want both of us to be successful here. How do you think we can make that happen? Now, all of a sudden, now you've got your boss trying to solve your problem. And, or why do you think we're doing things this way? What are your thoughts on that? Now, all of a sudden, they're helping you solve that problem. So, I guess ask what and how questions, and then maybe you don't have to try to figure out why they got that, but maybe now you're getting them to help you solve your problem.
Yeah, like being constructive. And I think the first thing we should do, and what I like to do, is just pull them aside and just ask them for a moment of their time in a secluded environment where it's just me and them, and we can just have a discussion about it. I think that's the first place we should start, is just communicating. We're people. Obviously, we're in different managerial and working positions, but we're human at the end of the day. But I really appreciate you offering that advice, because I do have a loved one experiencing something we've just spoken about, and I will share this podcast and your great advice with them. In terms of,
let me just add one more thing.
Okay.
Be careful with why questions,
Right.
because why questions tend to be accusatory.
Right.
Why are we doing things this way? That almost makes it, well, are you challenging me? So try to stay away from why questions and try to use more how and what questions to get them to help you solve the problem.
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. I actually never thought about that as well. And I think that's the great thing about doing podcasts and speaking with people like yourself, experienced veterans. You can just articulate your experiences, because you've been through so much in your life. And, us younger ones and growing up, and, we may have to potentially run into these certain challenges. So for you to share that wisdom with us, we could almost avert it in a way, and we know how to go about it. So I really, really appreciate doing these podcasts and learning from the guests and learning from yourself as well. And in terms of leadership, what common traits would you see in your general leader? What would you expect to see in a leader?
I'll give you an example, and this comes from your country. This comes from a book called Legacy that was written by a man by the name of James Kerr, and it's about the New Zealand national rugby team, who by most accounts is, if not the most, certainly one of the most successful sports franchises in any sport in any country of all times. And when I read that book, I couldn't put it down. I took like 4 pages of notes when I read that. It's amazing. I don't know if you probably can't see it, but over my head, I have my All Blacks hat, which I did another podcast with a gentleman in New Zealand, and he sent me the hat. But the thing I found interesting about the All Blacks, when they're looking to bring a player on, what do they look for? And obviously they look for a talented player. And I don't know anything about rugby, so I'm not even going to try to, make it seem like I do. But the 2 things that I found interesting, and I think this kind of goes to answering your question. One, they look to hire people of good character. What's your character like? How do you handle losing? Because we all lose from time to time. I don't care how good you are, you're going to lose. How do you handle that? How do you treat people when you're in a bad mood? How do you do that? So character is one. And the second thing that I thought was interesting, and I think this is incredibly important in leaders, and I don't think we think it is, but I think it is humility. I think back on all my times, all my job interviews that I had, where I went into those interviews like, oh my gosh, I better have all the answers to all the questions that this person asked me. Otherwise, I'm not going to get the job. But what the All Blacks say is, we know you're not going to have all the answers to all the questions individually. But us collectively, us together, us as a team, we will come together and figure out the answers. So I would say character is probably the number one thing a good leader needs to have. What kind of person are you? How do you treat people? And two, are you humble? It's not all about you. Like I said before, the job of a leader is to make more leaders.
Yeah, beautifully said, and great insight as well. What about the four truths of leading a resilient life?
Yeah,
and how did you discover these?
that's a great question. I have no idea how I discovered these. I mean, these were things. Honestly,
Oh,
I
wow.
was on a podcast with a woman whose her podcast was the three truths, and you had to come up with three truths, and it really forced me to think. What are my truths? What are things that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and they're not goals. We always
Mm,
set goals, and people make New Year's resolutions and stuff like that. And so many people fail, and they fail because they don't tie their goals to their values. So I think these four truths are things that I value. They're like the bedrock of my soul, is kind of what I call them. And I'll give them to you. They're just one sentence. I have them here on a post-it note in my office. The first one is, you need to control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is, embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make us stronger and more resilient individuals. The third one, and I've added this since I did that podcast with the woman, and this is to me more of a legacy truth, is what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the
mm.
fourth one is, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So I use these truths to help me make decisions in my life. In addition to, I have a very strong faith in God. I use that and the four truths, and so far it's gotten me through pretty well.
Is there one of the four truths that you resonate with the most?
I think the first one about controlling your mind, it's certainly the one that I learned early in life. I mentioned that I had 3 knee surgeries when I was in high school. And I remember when I went back playing after those knee surgeries, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower because of these surgeries, and coaches aren't going to be interested in reaching out about you playing for their college or university. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their school. I realized then that I had to change the narrative. And people ask me, how do I do that? If I'm a glass half empty person, how do I become a glass half full person? And I always tell them, it's not an overnight kind of thing. It's not something that you're going to wake up tomorrow and say, okay, all of a sudden I'm positive. We're human beings. We are going to have negative thoughts that pass through our mind. The Cleveland Clinic here, which is a major healthcare organization, has done some studies, and they suggest that on any given day, any of us have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our minds. But if you think about it, your brain can only hold one thought at a time. So why would you want to make that a negative thought? What I tell people is if you want to be more positive, first of all, you have to recognize that negative thought when it comes into your brain. And don't get all excited because you have negative thoughts. All of us, I don't care how positive you are, we all have negative thoughts. But
Absolutely.
realize that's a negative thought, and then just change it. Change the narrative to something positive. And if you do that over and over and over a period of time, and I don't know what that period of time is, eventually your brain will start to expect the positive. It'll start to expect the positive things and not so much the negative things. But again, understand you're going to have negative thoughts. I don't care how positive you are. Just flip them into something positive that works for you.
Yeah, it's interesting you speak about that because, there was a point in my life a couple of years ago, actually, I put on 35 kilos of body weight, and I became a gambling slash gaming slash drug abuser. And when I was in when I was in that low point, it was constantly just negative, 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 negative. And by the grace of God, the Most High, I've been able to transmutate that, and really do a full 180 on that. So I'm so grateful that I've just been allowed the experience and the opportunity, and to have the courage and the will and the determination to do that. There are so many people who are experiencing things like that and other challenging life experiences. What would you say to those individuals who are really they're either really down, or they're in a default mode, or they're in a rut, and they really want to change? Where do you think they should start?
Boy, that's a great question. There's sort of a fine line between people with mental illness who do need professional help, and
Absolutely.
I'm not a professional. And if you are in that situation, then please get yourself some help. Please get out there, and if you need medication, if you need to talk, to a professional, then do that. For the rest of us that are just kind of in a funk, and we're feeling kind of down and things like that, I'll give you a couple stories. One was a story that I read about back in the 1950s. There was a professor at Johns Hopkins University here in the United States that did a very simple experiment with rats. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the rats could tread water before they would sink and drown. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just before they were getting ready to drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, those rats treaded water on average for 60 hours. Think about
Oh,
that.
wow.
15 minutes. 15 minutes. I'm
incredible.
just not going to fail. I'm going to die. Second time, 60 hours, which says to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. We have to believe that maybe not this week, maybe not next month, maybe not even next year, but at some point in time, our life will get better. And secondly, just how much more resilient, how much tougher our bodies are than we ever thought they were. Now, I think everybody has a breaking point, but that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever thought that it was. And the second story that kind of dovetails with that is that there's a group in the military here called the Navy SEALs, some of the toughest men in the world. And the SEALs have what they call their 40% rule, which basically says that if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So whenever you get into those funks, whenever you get into those things where, I don't think I can do this anymore, I don't think I can go on, remember that you have that 60% left in reserve. And the last thing I'll tell you is, because I get there, I'm still dealing with cancer. I still have treatment every 3 weeks. And, I cry, I get down, I feel sorry for myself. But when I do, I find that I'm looking inward. Oh, woe is me, feel sorry for Terry. And I find a way to get out of that is to start looking externally. Who can I help? Who can I just say good morning to? Who can I say, hey, do you want to go have a cup of coffee? And now all of a sudden, my focus isn't on me and how bad I feel. My focus is on another human being and making them feel better. And all of a sudden, I'm feeling better. So those are a few suggestions that I would give to you to try to get people to just be able to keep moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And even for me, so last night I went out on the town and just walked through the town with my better half, and I felt so great, just seeing people, seeing families, seeing businesses as well, like just understanding that that's someone's business, and they've taken the time to invest in themselves and invest in others, and to offer a service that will help others. And it really inspires me and motivates me to genuinely do these podcasts and connect with people and try and offer something to the world. So I completely resonate with that. And also with the the Navy SEALs. When I was in that void, it was actually David Goggins who got me out of that. I heard his podcast with Joe Rogan, and he actually, yeah, he got me into ultra marathon running. I was able to lose that 35 kilos in 12 weeks, and the rest is history. And so I do owe a lot to that 40% rule, the Navy SEALs, and just incredible advice you gave. You are a motivational speaker, right? And people watching this, people listening to this can just feel and hear your energy. I just want to ask, like, where does the energy come from?
I think the energy comes from a purpose. One of the things, I started playing basketball when I was 9 years old, and I played all the way up until I graduated from college when I was 21. And I think what team sports, and for me, it was basketball. For other people, and it doesn't have to be sports. I mean, it could be a play, it could be in a band. Whatever it is. But one of the things that team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And you realize that on a team, that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. So, I don't feel that this is so much about me. It's kind of like looking at, how do you approach the world? When you get up in the morning, do you have to go to work, or do you get to go to work? When I go to treatment for my cancer, do I have to go to treatment, or do I get to go to treatment? It's really what handle you want to grab life with. And for me, I always try to grab it with, I get to do this. I get to go and do this. Because, there was a point in time where I probably shouldn't be alive through my cancer journey, and I am, which says to me that, you know what, God's not done with me yet. When I die, how I die, where I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are motivational speaking, is the way that you deliver the message different, like dependent on the group you're speaking to?
Not so much. I have to be me. I have to deliver it in the way that I feel is best. I try to do it with humor. I always try to throw some jokes in there and stuff like that, because especially when you're talking about a cancer journey, it can be very dark and ugly.
Yeah.
So I always try to throw some jokes in there and try to, there are plenty of, when I was on a drug therapy for 5 years, and I lost 50 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos. Sorry. But I lost 50 pounds, and I remember thinking, do you guys have Doritos over there? It's a snack chip.
Yes.
There was a point in time when I thought I was so skinny I could go hang gliding on a Dorito, and so I try to throw some humor into it, and I want to get the message across that I don't care how bad your life is, you can always find a way to keep moving forward. And we talk about winning the day. When I was on that drug therapy, sometimes winning the day for me was, I just got to win this 5 minutes. I just got to get out of bed and make it to the couch, to the sofa. And that's winning the day for me. So, I don't get too excited when, I have bad days, because I still do. And I'm figuring, you know what? I'm just going to try to keep moving forward. And as long as you do that, you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, beautifully said. And when you are motivational speaking, is that what you just spoke about, that is your intention or the outcome you are wanting to give or have from, doing these motivational interactions?
Yeah, my intention is not to be up there and say, hey, look at me, look what a great guy I am, look what a tough guy I am.
Yeah.
It's not that at all. It's what do I know? What have I learned that I can give to you? And maybe you can take that and build on it. Maybe you can take it and totally, incorporate it into your life. Or maybe you're going to tell me, you're all wet, Terry. I don't believe anything you said. That's okay. I've lived it. So I feel like, okay, I'm pretty much know what I'm talking about, but it's not about me. It's about trying to give what I've learned to make other people's lives better.
Well, in 2020, and you briefly touched on it when we first began, you wrote a book. I've got the title here: Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. For those who haven't seen or heard of the book, Can you give them a brief introduction about what the book is about?
Yeah, so it's probably easier for me to tell you how the book came about. So I had to. It's really was born out of two stories, two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached who'd moved with her fiance to the area where my wife and I live, and the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was really excited that she was living close. I coached girls high school basketball. That's why I said she. She was living close, and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, coach, what do you think my purpose is?" I said, "I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason." So that was one conversation. And then I had the second one was from a young man who reached out to me on social media and asked me what I thought were the most important things he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. Not that those aren't important. They are incredibly important. But I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I took some time and I had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally, I had my leg amputated in April of 2020. I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs in June of 2020. So while I was healing during that 3-month period, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence, the 10 principles to leading your uncommon and extraordinary life, came about.
I'm interested to know, because you're the first person, no, I believe the second person I've spoke to who is an author, but I didn't know that the first guest was an author. So was this the first book you've ever written? And what was that process like for you, if it was the first book you've ever written?
It was the first book that I've ever published. Let's put it that way.
Right.
I have written other ones. I wrote about my 8-year cancer journey. Now, I mean, obviously that's extended. I've never published that. That's kind of more for my family and that. Yeah, people ask me about my process. How'd you go about writing? I had 2 rules and 2 rules only. I'm not that smart, so I can't have a lot of rules. I can't follow them all. But the first rule was I will write a minimum of 1 page every day, Monday through Saturday. And the second rule was I will not edit anything until I have the first draft done. So there were days I would sit down at the computer and I would write absolute garbage. And I knew I was writing garbage. But then the next day, I'd write something that was good. And so, that was kind of the process. Like I said, there were days, this is terrible. I know it's terrible, but I got to keep writing. I got to keep, doing it. And then as over time, it's kind of like, okay, you start throwing out the garbage once you have your first draft. And then I was able to get with a gentleman and his wife who was a former police chief, so a head of a police agency here in the United States. One day while he was chief, one of his friends said, "Hey, will you come out to California and put on a presentation for authors that want to understand police tactics so they can incorporate them in their books?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem. Free trip to California. I'll go do that." So he goes out there, puts on this presentation, ends up meeting his wife. His wife is like a 40-time best-selling fiction author. He gets out of law enforcement, and they started a not-for-profit publishing company. And so I got hooked up with him. So I didn't have to publish the book on my own. I was able to, I had editors that went through the book in different phases. I had cover designers, layout designers, his wife who was, here's how you market the book and all that stuff. So I had a lot of really good people that were able to help me get the book published.
So having gone through the process of writing the book, having it edited, having it published, and then obviously having it for sale, what if anything, like what has surprised you the most? Did you learn something about yourself, or just something about the process of writing a book that authors may go through so you can understand them better?
Yeah, I mean, obviously being a man, I've never had a baby, but this was as close to having a child as I've ever had. And I remember the editors would come back to me. They would read a section and they would come back and they're like, you should take this out, or you should expand on this, or you should do whatever. And I was almost indignant. It was like, how dare you tell me what, this is mine. How dare you tell me what to do? And then I was like, wait a minute, you idiot. These are people that are experts at what they do. You don't know anything about this process. Why are you telling them how to do their job? So I would always used to say, let me sleep on it. I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to make that change, but let me sleep on it. And I'll be honest with you, Jake, 99.9% of the time, the next morning, I would be like, yeah, what they're saying makes sense. And I would either take it out or I would add,
Right.
more and expand on it and stuff like that, because they were the experts. I mean, it would be like you telling me how to be a cop. I'm like, wait a minute, you never went to the police academy. So that was a hard thing for me to get over, because I was so, I had blood, sweat, and tears into it. I had, days where, oh God, this sucks. Oh, wait a minute, this is pretty good. You have all these emotions going on. And if you can take the emotion out of it, and you can't, but if you can, and just look at it as strictly, this is, I'm publishing a book. It's just like operating a business. What's the best thing for the book to make the best product for a consumer to consume? And that's pretty much, I had to sort of take my hands off of it and give it over to the experts and let them, massage it and make it better.
You've been in like different professional roles and managerial positions as well. And you also said you coached uh, women's basketball. Did you ever, like being in those positions, did you ever experience people doing that to you, like telling you how to do your job? And if you did, how did you navigate through that?
Oh yeah, I mean that happened all the time as a policeman. You can't arrest him. You can't, what, don't do that. Do it this way, and it's like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. You have no idea.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, going back to our discussion on law enforcement, I think that's where there's that chasm between civilians and law enforcement. They don't understand how we're trained. They don't understand what we're doing. And I always recommend to people, most law enforcement agencies, at least here in the United States, have what they call citizens police academies, where you can go, maybe one night a week for 6 or 8 weeks, and they'll give you a mini version of what the academy's like. Here's how law enforcement's trained. Here's why they do what they do. But that being said, we're kind of our own worst enemy. Kind of like you made the comment earlier, when you talk to the police, they're not real receptive to wanting to talk with you. And where I think we lose it, or where we lose sort of the credibility, is we don't explain why we're doing what we're doing. Let me give you an example. One night we were looking for a particular car that was involved in a robbery, and 2 other officers had pulled over a similar car. It ended up not being the car we were looking for, and the people in it were not the people we were trying to get. But the people in it were like, and you would have this, I would have this same thought. Why'd you pull me over?
Right.
Why did you stop me at 2 o'clock in the morning? What did I do? And these 2 officers who initially did it were not very good at articulating things. They just said, I don't need to tell you, just go on. And my partner and I went up and we told them, look, we're looking for a similar car that matches the description of individuals who were involved in a robbery. And once we told them that and said, hey, we appreciate your cooperation, it's not you, thanks for your time, you're free to go, they were like, oh, okay, that makes total sense as to why. But we don't do a good job of that in law enforcement, of telling you why we are doing what we're doing. And some of that is, you don't understand it, and I don't feel like telling you, but we would do ourselves a better service. We do ourselves a disservice by not doing that. So I think I started down that road. Ask me your question again, because I don't think that really answered your question, and I've totally forgotten it because I'm old. So
No, I think that definitely answered it. And
Okay.
Thank you for that. Like, thank you for the insight. And I also like, thank you for the humility of, like owning, like just taking some ownership and recognizing, both sides, right? Like, because I feel like
Sure.
in any kind of relationship or interaction, it's, it's a dance here between two parties. Like, obviously, we're both involved. So your humility to recognize both sides, I think that's incredible. I think humans in general, I think we need more of that. And so with the podcast, I like to ask two final questions, and
Sure.
it's really more about self celebration and allowing me and allowing those listening and allowing yourself to celebrate yourself. So I want to ask you, what are you most proud of doing in this life?
Oh, most proud of my wife and I raising our daughter. I mean, there was a time in my life where I didn't think I wanted children. I grew up with brothers. I have no sisters. I went to an all boys Catholic high school. I went to an all male military college. So when my wife was pregnant, and the doctor was like, "You should buy pink," I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no. You need to leave it in there till it's done." I have no idea what to do with a girl. But I think part of it is, especially today, so many young people, when they become parents, they want to be the child's friend. You're not their friend. You're their parent. You got to make the hard decisions. You got to make the decisions where they go pounding up the stairs and slam the door and tell you that they hate you. And you got to tell them, well, I love you. And that's why I'm making the decision I'm making. So, no doubt, raising our daughter was the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm yet to become a parent, and well, I don't know what the future holds for me, but that may potentially be in the cards, and maybe I'll be able to resonate with what you just said. And the final question is, what is your hope for the world and future generations?
I, I really hope we stop. Let me back up. I hope we put more love into the world. I mean, we are. One thing I learned as a negotiator was the importance of listening, and not listening to respond, but listening to understand. And I don't think we're doing that right now. Around the world, we're just screaming at each other. And when I'm screaming at you and you're screaming at me, I can't hear what you're saying, and you can't hear what I'm saying. So, by you saying something and me saying, okay, Jake, help me understand it. I may agree with you, I may not agree with you, but help me understand where you're coming from. Now we're connecting as human beings. And if we come at it from basically a perception of love, of caring, of service. Mother Teresa had a great quote. She said, "God never asked us to be successful. He just asked us to be faithful." And if we could approach life with more love and more caring for each other, I think the world would be a better place.
Incredible words. And just to continue on from that, I was having a discussion with a friend about Roe and Wade, like abortion, like the political system, like Black Lives Matter, and just how they're so polarizing. Like, and it's like left or right, white and black, red or blue. And I was saying in the conversation, like, how do we best deal with that? And I mean, you've just answered it, right? Because obviously they gave their perception, but I really do believe, like, what you just said is the answer, like the ability to just simply listen and listen to not react or respond, but listening to actually take in what they're saying with love and with understanding and compassion, and then giving them and offering them and yourself enough respect to uh, potentially agree to disagree. So, Terry Tucker, you're incredible. You're on this incredible journey in this life, and may God be with you. I hope that people listen to your message and listen to your life experience and get some positive like reinforcement to continue on in their life through their suffering, through their hard times. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom and your insight. Just thank you for being you and showing up today. I really do appreciate your time. I appreciate you. Many blessings and much love.
Well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. You're doing good work. I think you need to keep doing what you're doing as well. You're expanding people's horizons. You're giving people a different perspective on a lot of things. And as long as you're honest and you approach it with character and humility, I honestly believe you'll be incredibly successful. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.